Hello, everyone. My name is AJ Kuftic. I'm Field CTO here at Expedient, and with me today is the CEO and founder of MEO Continuity, Max Glodde. Max, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Good to see you, AJ. Thanks for having me on.
This is a really interesting conversation that actually started with Max and I meeting at an event and kind of nerding out a bit about two very different ends of the DR spectrum. And so we wanted to kind of put together this like sort of look from both angles around ITDR, business continuity, and risk mapping. Max, can you give me a quick intro on your on what your company does at MEO Continuity?
Yeah, no, thanks, AJ. So yeah, at MEO Continuity, we focus very heavily on business impact analysis as well as business continuity planning. So we're helping companies quantify all the things that are really important to them, and then also, of course, the mitigation that goes with all of those things. So ultimately, it's about telling a more compelling, quantified story about what matters to you, how exposed are you, and how are you protecting yourselves, which is useful in so many different arenas, right? Everything from IT to supply chain to business continuity to insurance buying. That's what we do. That's what we focus on.
And for us at Expedient, we are usually the beneficiaries of that as a full stack cloud service provider, providing DR as a service, data protection and cloud services, along with AI and cloud native and co-location. There's so many things where that quantified impact kind of lands on our side. So throughout this, we're going to look at the current state of disaster recovery and kind of where it sits today. And then we're going to talk through how to quantify a DR investment and really how risk mapping works. And then we're going to talk through how to actually do DR correctly. And not just DR, but when we think beyond disaster recovery to sort of application and infrastructure design, and then we'll wrap it up from there. So what is the current state of disaster recovery? And for my IT folks, if you appear in this, or if you feel like I'm taking a shot at you, I'm not. I just want to make sure that everybody's aware of how DR kind of works today. And really, there's two main ways that this happens. One is production gets an upgrade. We have some hardware that becomes the new DR. And in a lot of cases, this is what I call hand-me-down disaster recovery, because it is trying to maximize the investment that you've made both in the production hardware and being able to show a return on the investment of the production hardware by saying, hey, we don't need to buy anything for disaster recovery. But really, this is aiming for checkbox disaster recovery. We have a place we can go to. We have a place to recover to, but it's really emergency use only. No one wants to go do that. No one wants to go use that hardware. No one wants to go do that. But for some compliance reason or for some business reason, you have to have disaster recovery. And so this is a really, really, really inexpensive way to tick the box. The other way that we see is you have co-location with DR specific gear. You bought a second set of hardware, you landed in a secondary data center, and it's designed to be more than a checkbox because you have DR specific gear and it's in a data center and not the wonderful closet that you see there on the right, but it's not going to run everything. It is not designed to run everything. It is designed really for only the most critical of workloads. And because, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry to butt in. I was kind of laughing because we do a lot of facility tours. As you can imagine, we see closets like this all the time. So definitely resonates with what we're seeing as well.
Yeah, I have seen and put things into my fair share of secondary site closets, a half rack on the floor with a, plug into the wall, APC battery. Like, I have been there. That's what I want to say. I see you. I recognize you. But this is not designed to be a true, everything has gone very wrong platform. This is the deepest of insurance policies that you could have just because you need to have something on the board. And so when we actually start thinking about that, these two things become a problem. Because when you look at IT and disaster recovery, it is designed around how much to recover. It's not designed on how you're going to recover or what you're going to recover. It's designed to catch what you can. And it's really focused on operations and cost because, Max, let's be really clear here. No one wants to go to DR. No one wants to press that button. And if you are on the business continuity side of the house, and this is actually part of the conversation that brought this up, why is it that after 2 hours, we're not going to DR? Because if I can take an extra hour, I'm not having to press that button and find out what happens. So this is very much focused on, do I have something that I can show and potentially have a test somewhere along the line to show that we can do that? Whereas business continuity is worried about what matters most and when to fail over. And that is a very different set of circumstances and impacts and decisions than what the IT folks are going through. And so it's really focused on the business impact and interruption and not necessarily on how the recovery actually works. And Max, you've seen this in real life.
Yeah, I see this in real life. Like, we have these conversations where even when you and I were just chatting about this, the difference between that first box on the left and then the business continuity box is when we would do this work before we really got into IT on some of our projects, it was like, well, we assume that if the app goes down, immediately the efforts to recover it start. And that's not true, right? Someone has to actually declare a disaster, right? Someone has to say, hey, this is a problem now. So between the moment when it stopped and the moment when people start working on it, you might have hours, days go by before then the actual, recovery kicks in. And that alone causes misalignment between what the business is expecting to happen versus what IT says this is what we're going to do, right? So a lot of this conversation is just about getting everybody onto the same page, speaking the same language.
Yeah, and when we start looking at that, though, I look at IT, DR, and the business continuity folks, and I kind of get to a point of both of them are doing more than just disaster recovery. Business continuity folks are focused on things beyond, hey, our applications are down, to things like, hey, there's a fire in the building. How do we make sure everybody got out safely? How do we make sure that in the event of a large-scale natural disaster that our employees are safe? How do we make sure that operations continue, not technology-wise, but literal business operations continue? But the problem is that both have struggled to justify spending on disaster recovery. On the IT side, it's, yeah, man, hardware is expensive. And doing that, you're going after something that you, again, hope to never use. So the ROI is, well, if we use it, it'll be great. But I don't have a great way to tell you what that saves us, what that does, what the value of it is. And Max has some thoughts on that here in a moment. But this is where we see a distinct shift, and the business continuity folks are just so focused on business impact that they don't know what the IT costs would be. And the fun part of all this was we have terms on both sides, like recovery time objective and recovery point objective, RTO and RPO. And we've talked about that on our webinars before. I know, Max, I'm sure you guys have talked about that too in your space. But I realized something while at this event is that we're not saying the same thing. Because when I ask the IT people, what does recovery time objective mean?
You did a survey on this, right? Survey of
yes. People. Yeah, so I did an impromptu, very non-scientific survey. Please do not try to find the R values or anything like that of my survey data. This is really anecdotal. But I went around and I would say, are you an IT person or a business continuity person? Because this was a DR event that was designed for both. And I would ask the IT people, and the IT people would say, well, that's the amount of time it takes me to run my DR plan. And the business continuity people would say, no, that's the amount of time the application can be down without affecting the business. And so you now have a bit of a problem here. You have two different meanings to the same word. And what happens here is, on the IT side, it is designed around the amount of time it takes to execute the DR plan. But that clock doesn't start until someone declares a disaster. On the business continuity side, it starts when the application is down. Those are two very, very different clocks.
Yeah, they're basically trying to avoid the disaster from happening in the first place in that conversation. And you're saying, well, now a disaster, or IT saying now a disaster has happened. All right, let's recover. And so, yeah, I mean, that's the core of the difference.
And you have the same term, but you have incredibly different answers. And this was something that, like, I watched light bulbs go off over and over and over again when I explained this, because I'm coming at it from an IT angle. I started my career, I've spent my entire career on the IT side of the house. And so when I'm explaining this to them, they go, oh, that's why they don't want to fail over. I'm like, right, because you haven't declared a disaster yet. You've not said it's disaster time. It's time to fail over. We need to do something about this. And so for them, that RTO clock hasn't started. And they went, oh, I have some apologizing to do. I watched a lot of askance looks. I watched a lot of the, oh no. So it was very interesting to have that conversation. And so what ends up happening is both sides are fighting for attention, right? DR is not a priority. Funding is incredibly limited. And because funding is limited, DR is focused only on the critical workloads for emergency use only. And a lot of this comes down to the fact that they don't speak the same language. But we all know, both Max on the risk management side, I on the IT side, and every business continuity person and IT person here knows that if everything were to go very, very wrong, we know the costs to recover and the cost of the business of having a proper DR environment outweighs the cost of the business of that level of impact. But why can't the business see that? And Max, I think this is really where quantification comes into play. And I was like, I think this is a big difference for a lot of people because they don't dive into it at this level.
Yeah, I would say that the business continuity person, whoever's in charge of protecting the enterprise value of the organization, most of the time we find they also don't quantify it, right? So they're using a lot of subjective scales, which makes it very difficult to communicate. So AJ, you can be best friends with the risk manager, but if they're not quantifying it that way either, then you guys are just best friends and you agree that this is important, but how do we now communicate that to the CFO, to the people that hold the purse strings, to the people that have to make these big decisions across the entire organization, right? So, good segue. This is what we're going to be talking about. How can we use business impact mapping, right, the quantification of what's important to us to justify disaster recovery investment, right? So that's what this is about. So if we start first, everybody's seen the heat map. Everybody sees and has used a version of this. I used to use a version of this. Let's try and actually kill the heat map for now, okay? Why do we want to kill the heat map? I guarantee you, if you survey a bunch of people in the business and you say, hey, what's important to you? You can ask every single business function in an organization, all 60 to 100 functions, on a scale of 1 to 10 or green, amber, red, rate what's important to you. Everyone's going to end up with a set of red boxes. The problem is when you compare your red box to somebody else's, you don't actually know which red box is more important. Now, pretend you're giving that to your CFO to say, hey, this risk is super important. He's going to go, well, how important is it? Right? So the red box is very subjective. What it also does is it really encourages bias towards consensus. So AJ, you and I might say, here's a risk that we're looking at. Here's a thing that's really important. You might say it's a 5. I might say it's a 3. So let's settle on 4. So now we're not really, we're making bigger risks smaller than they should be. And we don't really want to do that either, right? So we should get away, we should kill the heat map and move more towards a quantitative approach to communicate our message, right? So how do we do that? Let's go to the next slide. So the core players that we typically see that need to be involved in this process, some more than others. First is finance. This finance is going to be your common language. Why is that the case? At the end of the day, 99+% of businesses are in business for what?
Money.
Right? We want to make money. So revenue margin speaks the language of everybody. So you need your finance, it's going to be your best friend. Then we need the risk manager. The risk manager is going to be your quarterback. Their job is designed to function across all the different silos in the business. It is literally their job to protect the business in any way they can. Then we need, of course, the IT professional. I often call these people the enablers. Hi, AJ. IT is really the lubricant that makes businesses run these days. Everything runs on IT. If you didn't have IT, everything stops. It's just a matter of fact. And then, of course, you need the business. Now, I call these people the ones with the juice. These are the people that have the information you need to be able to tell a compelling story around what's important in the business. They're not going to give you the financial quantification because they can't do that, but they're going to help you map business impact. So this is your dream team, right? I love analogies here as, Mr. Anchorman. So these are the people we want to assemble, start making friends with them. So the problem with all these people, as you can imagine, they all speak in kind of different currencies. And the best way I know how to analogize this, if for those that like Friends, there's an episode where a bunch of information gets misconstrued among these 6 friends, and they end up basically saying, hey, they don't know that we know that they know that we know. And this is kind of what we're talking about. You end up with a lot of circular conversations that are pretty subjective, and it doesn't really result in any kind of tangible outcome, but we feel good because we've talked about it. So the business generally speaks profit, market share, customer satisfaction, production. Those are examples. IT speaks, as we said, RTO, RPO, and failovers, as well as data replication. And then risk speaks more in exposure, likelihood, and severity. They also have the concept of RTO and RPO, as we just talked about. So we have to figure out a way to tie all these people together without asking them to do stuff that's not in their core wheelhouse, right? So if we go to the next slide, what really before I get into how we do that, I want to demonstrate this with an example. And AJ, I talked to you about this. This works way better in person, but we're going to do it. So AJ, I'm going to ask you, this is a Post-it note. There's nothing on it, nothing special about it. And if I said to you, hey, AJ, you know exactly where this Post-it note is. It's 500 yards away. I just need you to please go and get that and bring it to me. What chance do I have of you doing that?
Probably pretty low. I'm not walking that far for a Post-it note.
Pretty far, right? Okay, fair. Most people will probably agree with you unless they're really, really nice, right? Now, if I said to you, AJ, hey, that Post-it note, it's a red priority. What chance do I have now?
It's a Post-it note. There's any other Post-it notes. Why is that Post-it note so important? What do I need to, why do I need to go get that particular one when I can give you an entire stack out of the drawer next to me?
Exactly. All right. So we're arguing about the wrong thing. So now I say to you, AJ, I'm going to give you $5,000 if you go, please retrieve that Post-it note. Still don't know why.
I'm going to get that Post-it note right now. I've already left.
You'll fight people for it. Yeah. Right. So let me ask you, what has actually changed?
You've given me you've given me about 5,000 reasons to to go get that Post-it note. And that's the sort of thing where you're going beyond just, this thing is important to me, which is fine. And I recognize that, but is it important for that particular piece of paper? Or is it important because it's a type of Post-it note that you need? If you have one, do you have more than those? And I think that's part of the overall argument. You've given me now 5,000 reasons to go get that because, yeah, I would like $5,000. That would be nice.
Yeah, so basically what's changed is we've quantified the impact, and I've given you a reason to prioritize paying attention to that particular Post-it note over anything else. Whereas if I just said it's red, you're like, well, I don't actually know what that means. So I've clearly communicated to you the importance. You actually still don't know what I'm going to use that Post-it note for, and that's totally okay. I left you in your silo, but I've given you something that allows you to take action, right? So if we go to the next slide, when we look at businesses, it's basically kind of that Post-it note example, just on a much bigger scale, right? Like in actual real life. So the idea is that we fundamentally have to find a way to shift the conversation by connecting IT to the business, ultimately to the products that we sell and the financials that those products then generate, right? Revenues is the easy one. And the way we do that is when we look at each of these buckets, not a single person, if you ask the CFO, for example, they can tell you what your sales are, but they won't be able to tell you which application specifically is very important to the business in a quantified way. They can't answer that question because they don't have that visibility. The same way that IT can say, hey, this application we use, we sort of know it's important, but we don't know how much revenue it impacts, right? So what we're trying to do here is we have to implement a framework that allows us to let adjacent disciplines talk to each other and say, hey, this application supports this production line, which makes these products, which ultimately are sold for $100. Now we can say this application is this important, right? And then we get into mitigation and all these other fun things. That's what this mapping is all about, right? So how do we do that? Now, before we get into that, I like stories. So many of you watching this probably think you're pretty good at bowling. Well, nobody that's watching this, guarantee you, will beat my 3-year-old at bowling. And I'm going to tell you why, because you're looking at me sideways right now.
I mean, it's a 3-year-old at bowling. How's he getting the ball down the lane? I can get the ball down the lane. He can't.
Yeah, right. So what does he do? He shows up, and first thing he does when it's his time to bowl, he knows, Dad, let's put the bumpers up. Let's get the bumpers going. Okay, next thing that shows up is the ramp comes out. Let's get the ramp out. Okay, great. And then layers on one more thing. Goes, Dad, I'm gonna use 2 balls. I'm looking at him. Okay, I mean, I guess let's give ourselves the best shot, right? And lines it up, rolls the 2 balls down the ramp, strike almost every single time, right? So, yeah, he'll beat anybody at bowling. But how is he doing that? The point is, he has set himself a framework that allows him to succeed pretty much every time and hit his objective. And this is kind of the same thing, right? When we're quantifying business impact, regardless of where we are in the business, we need to have a framework in place that allows people enough flexibility to add the information that's important to them without going too far off the rails to where they're still bowling towards that same outcome of getting a strike, quantifying the impact so everyone can understand the language, the common language that they're speaking in. And by the way, the other thing that's important about a framework, and because we've done this a bunch of times, I can tell you that if you have the desire to map how important applications are, I can tell you that in 6 months or a year from now, you're going to have to also map the impact of the process areas and the things that those applications affect on the business, because that's usually how it goes, right? We want to know by extension what the business impact is. So when you implement your framework, make sure you're selecting something that supports all of those additional things you're going to do. And it doesn't matter where you start. Like you can start in a factory. I know that if you want to map the importance of a factory, at some point you're going to ask me about how important are the IT applications that support that factory, right? You're going to ask me at some point, right? So this is what we're talking about. This is what we do, right? I mean, we built a framework that helps companies do this and not rely on Excel, because that's somewhat insane when you're trying. It's very difficult, right? Used to do this in Excel. Don't do that anymore.
So one thing I want to say is I hear all of you who are saying he's doing better at bowling because he's cheating. I hear you all. You can cheat at your job too. And I think that's the bigger thing to think of here is like, okay, he's bending the rules because he's a 3-year-old and he's taking advantage of the fact that he can do that. But I think the other part of this is when you are having these conversations, sometimes you're going to have to ask tough questions that people don't have the answers to. And I went through this in my career as well, where I would run into I started my career in manufacturing IT, still have my hard hat. It is a prominent time in my career growth. And one of the times that I ran into this was at one of our production lines. It was at the very, very end of the production process. It was one of the last things that it did before they got wrapped and shipped out. And I walked into a room and I saw this rack and I was like, are there servers in there? And they were 4 compact Reliant 1600Rs, which at the time were 10 years old. And I said, those look old as heck. What are they running? They said, oh, they run the mill. Okay. Might want to upgrade those. And they said, well, we can't because they run NT4 and we can't upgrade it. I said, well, why can't you upgrade it? There's new operating systems out. We can totally upgrade. This is not that big of a leap. And they said, well, if we do, it's going to cost us millions of dollars because we have to rewrite the code for the line in order to run on a new OS. And I went, oh. And Max, I think you have a similar story here as well.
Yeah, I'm smiling because the story that I have is pretty much kind of like that. Yep. So I call it, let's talk about Toshiba. But what you're looking at, and again,
just to be clear, we're not slandering you, Toshiba and Toshiba.
I don't worry, absolutely not.
You're just talking specifically here.
This is the fact that this thing is actually still running is just a
testament
to how good Toshiba actually is. so what you're looking at is an actual, I guess, 1996-ish time frame Toshiba laptop, and that's not a toaster oven, but that's what AI gave me. That's a laser engraver. And this story is about a company that makes products that are regulated, and one of the requirements of the production process is that every single product that goes out the door has to be laser engraved with a serial number. Now, to our surprise, when we're doing the plant tour, every time we go, we want to do a plant tour, understand how the company actually makes these things. And we come across this laser engraver, really nice piece of equipment, looks very new. And then hooked up to it, hardwired, is this really thick Toshiba laptop. And we took note of that. We get back into the meeting room and we start talking about all the different production dependencies and what processes are used to make XYZ products. And eventually we talk about this laser engraver. I said, okay, this thing supports everything that goes out of the door, right? Millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. Absolutely. Can we talk about the laptop that's hooked up to it? Oh, okay. So they just start smiling. And I said, what's the deal with that? I said, yeah, we can't run the laser engraver without the laptop. And I said, okay, what happens if the laptop breaks? And they said, oh yeah, we just get on eBay and we find a new thing. Now, I still think that eBay is single-handedly holding up a significant part of our economy, because the amount of times we hear that, it's, oh, just buy the spare parts on eBay, don't worry about it, is actually crazy. So, but the point is, what we were able to do with this is, because we understood from the framework we had implemented for this company, we already knew when we showed up on site exactly which products they made, exactly how much revenue they supported. We then understood through our process area mapping the production processes that are required to support that revenue. And then we're able to map the Toshiba and many other applications to all the different production processes. And we're then able to compare the RTOs, the MTOs, the SLAs, all the stuff that IT had defined for recovering this Toshiba laptop to what does this thing cost us per hour of downtime? And to no surprise, it was a lot of money. The good news is that with this level of quantification, they could go straight to the CFO on day 3 and say, hey, by the way, this is one of our top 5 exposures. We should invest in upgrading, to your point. We should upgrade this infrastructure, which they now have like a year later, right? So they've done it, which is, that's a big win, right? It's a big win for the client. It's obviously a big win for us. I love finding stuff like that. But this is what we're talking about, right? It's boots on the ground in the operations. It's not theoretical. We are connecting stuff like this to the value chain of the business to help justify these investments, right? So let's go to the next slide and actually zoom out for this company. Overall, because of the framework, in 2 years' time or so, this client was able to map hundreds of products that support many, many customers at 42 locations. That amounts to about 2,500 processes total, with thousands of suppliers and business functions, and connected all the way back to about 300-ish applications with their respective hosting entities to build out this picture. They can now go and say, I want to know why is SAP important? That's always an easy one. Yeah, well, it supports pretty much everything, right? So it
touches everything.
We can pull up a report and show exactly how business functions are using it, how locations are using it, and what they would do, most importantly, if SAP for some reason was unavailable. So they can pinpoint where they have mismatches in their DR versus how the business or their maximum acceptable downtime is expecting the thing to respond, right? So that's that thing that we talked about earlier, AJ, where we said, hey, we don't actually invoke the recovery until a disaster is declared, versus the business is saying, from the moment the thing's not working, I have 6 hours before I have to stop what I'm doing, right? So we were able to kind of connect that together. So that was pretty exciting stuff.
I think this is also where I think everybody who's on this, listening to this right now, you can think of that one thing in your environment where you're like, don't touch that. We don't know what will happen if you touch it. Please don't touch it. I don't want to find out. And I've worked in healthcare. Healthcare is full of that. I'm sorry if you work in healthcare and you are triggered by this. But yeah, that system that's in the back corner that no one's allowed to touch, it's probably doing something incredibly important. And when you start to have these bigger risk conversations. And by the way, I would love for you to go back in time and tell the plant line manager and the plant manager when I was telling them, hey, you need to upgrade this because the attic full of equipment that we've begged, borrowed, and stolen from half the company, as they've been rotating out their hardware, I have a finite supply of that, and eBay is only going to last but so long. You should probably start investing in this. Otherwise, it's going to break, and I'm not going to be able to get it back. And that part, like, it turns into a likelihood issue. And like you mentioned earlier with, risk people and business continuity, it's very much focused on what is the likelihood of this thing happening. The likelihood of getting struck by lightning, not very high. The likelihood of you running out of replacement parts on 15-year-old hardware, real high. So this is something that you have to consider overall. And by saying that, I could say, yeah, I know the part to replace this fan is like $100 or whatever, but someday I won't be able to pay $100 for a new fan. Someday I will have to replace that whole thing, or I won't be able to replace it at all. And now millions of dollars by the hour is disappearing because you didn't want to do the correct maintenance up front.
Well, it's the concept of these black swan events as well, right? Like that's why our logo is what it is, right? It's these big events that you can't really predict, but you can always rationalize them by hindsight. You say, well, I guess I could see how that could have happened, and I probably could have prevented it, and I had my head in the sand a little bit because I was like, it's fine. But you look at anything these days, the natural disasters, look at anything that's been put out by like a Munich Re or some Swiss Re, any of those guys, you see natural disasters, the losses are just trending in the wrong direction. This is not something you can ignore anymore. There is this big shift moving away from compliance-based risk management to resilience-based risk management, which is, no, we actually care because we want to be resilient. We're not just responding to some checkbox thing or say, hey, we should be compliant. You can be compliant all you want. I've reviewed so many BCPs that are compliant where, okay, they're nice, but they don't contain the actual quantified strategy of what you're going to do, right? So that this highlights, and this is what this solves, right? So if we go to the next slide, that's really my last main slide on this. Ultimately, what it does, and this picture kind of tells a good story, right? It can set you apart in terms of getting the attention of the CFO, getting the attention of the people that you need to get attention from, because you've now quantified the impact. It's so much easier for them to make rapid decisions to say, hey, this is a red square on a heat map, and get in line, there's 30 other people that have those, versus saying, hey, you know what? If we don't invest in this and it breaks, which it probably will, it's $642 million of exposure, and here's how that's going to manifest itself. What do you want to do? It communicates very clearly. It reduces friction. Decisions get made way faster. And you're also then able to just invest in the right areas at the right time, because your business will shift and change, and your framework needs to support those changes as well, right? And we can talk about that at another time. So that's basically it from a business impact quantification mapping and how you can bring all this together in a more meaningful way to help you make those business decisions to invest in the right areas. So I'll pass it back to you, AJ, to talk about DR and how it's done.
And I think, and thank you, Max. And I think this is something that I don't want this to be a just purely DR conversation either, because you have to, as the BC people are yelling right now, that RTO being 2 hours and that being a thing where I can't have this application down for more than 2 hours or it starts to impact the business, or that's at least what the business has told us, changes the math a little bit. So obviously we've made some improvements, right? Going back to our original checklist, DR, we've now made it a business priority because we now can show the exposure to any sort of event. We can show what happens if this thing were down for this period of time. We can now justify the ROI and spending the money on risk mapping. So now, if we go back to our, closet DR, how do we get past just the critical workload? How do we get past emergency use only? And how do we get IT and BC working together? And so, Max, you just mentioned all the natural disasters and things like that. And this is something I talk about a lot, the term, just generic natural disasters. And the problem with that is that this is what we've been designing DR for the entire time. From an IT standpoint, we are always thinking about something large has happened. And the problem with that is that the DR structure that goes out to the business is based around not natural disasters. Some of it's in there for sure, but it's also, how do I protect or bring applications back up faster in the event of a long-scale outage? And that becomes a different set of scenarios. So what is the actual right way to do DR? We have to understand the business requirements for uptime upfront. And this is part of the risk mapping to say, if there's $642 million of exposure, if you don't fix this problem or you don't get this application up in this period of time, that changes my math and my design structure of how I roll out an application. Because if you're focused on just pure DR recovery, and when I say that, I mean, I have applications that are built in one site and I copy their data or the workload itself to another site and I turn it on, that does not meet the structure of someone saying you have 2 hours for this to be downtime, or the maximum allowed downtime being 2 hours. And we have to test for more than just the production data center is unavailable. Because if you only test for that, you design for that. And if your DR is designed at that level, when you have issues like, hey, we need to execute the DR plan because this application's been down for 4 hours or 6 hours, your IT person is going to look at you like you got 8 heads, because they're not going to fail over an individual application.
It's too big. Like it's the response is outsized to what's actually happening. Right? If you just have an application or two down, you're like, that's not full DR.
No,
not by any stretch, right? But it does need to be addressed. So you end up in this like stalemate. It's like a weird valley of nothingness. It's just like, okay, we're gonna just sit on this until it becomes such a big problem that you don't want to get the call from the C-suite saying, hey, fix this today. Like, you don't want that. So
no, I have not been necessarily a C-suite, but going back to my manufacturing life, I got a risk mapping lesson in real time at a high volume from a plant manager when we had a server outage. So it was very much, hey, I'm spending a lot of money to have a bunch of guys stand around and do nothing right now. You need to fix this pronto. So
I can, if I may, I want to just, those that are listening and watching, just a pro tip on this, right? Because you mentioned disasters and we plan for a specific disaster. And we get this question quite a lot, which is, well, do you have a risk register? And you have all these different things that could go wrong. And there are probabilities, earthquakes, fires, floods, you name it. When you come at the business with a specific scenario in mind and you say, hey, let's say we had a fire, what would you do? What we find happens very often is people will start debating on how that fire would materialize, and they start arguing over the probabilities of that going on. And that's not actually what you're looking for. So I would always, and this is how we approach this, is scenario neutral completely. It is a time-based exercise. You're coming at them and saying, if this application were gone for any reason, if they ask you for what reason, it's like, that's not about it. Don't worry about it. If you don't have this, gone today, what's affected tomorrow? That is what I want to know. You're going to have really valuable conversations. You're going to get data that is much more versatile in terms of, you can then take that and say, okay, we understand how important it is. Now let's look at all the things that could affect it, right? So we always we do encourage people to kind of spin that and look at it from that angle, because it is just, let's figure out what's important first, and let's even figure out if we need better DR or a risk register for that thing, right? That's a very practical approach.
So Max, in the same spirit of your Post-it note, I'm going to ask you a similar question here. You're going on vacation. How are you getting there?
Oh man, where are we going? Depends. It really depends. How far? I mean, we live in the US, right? I'd probably be inclined to drive. We love driving. I've driven all the way across country. I don't recommend that to anybody. It's pretty far, but depends. I got a lot of options.
So you live in South Carolina, if I recall. So if you were going to Atlanta, you're probably going to drive, right?
I'll drive. Yeah.
Right. Going to Disney World down in Orlando from South Carolina, that's what, like 7 hours, something like that?
That's a tough one, man. With the kids these days, the tickets that's different.
That's a different story. I'm just asking how you're going to get there, not how you're going to pay for it.
That's right. Yeah.
I don't know what the risk mapping is for Disney tickets, but it's excessive. How do you, like, when you ask how you're getting there, like, my first thought is not flying. As a family of 4, Every plane ticket, every time you see that, oh, this ticket to this place is only $200. It's like, no, that's $800 to me because I have to do it 4 times, not 2 or 1. And so if I said, actually, your vacation is you live in New York and you're going to LA, you're not driving. That's 41 hours of driving across the country. That's a really long time. Congratulations. You just sunk at least 2, if not 3 days on each side going to and from that vacation versus flying, which takes 5 hours and 40 minutes. And oh, by the way, the ticket price there says it's $200 and some there. And I think when you take that math compared to the cost of gas and hotels and everything to get across the country, driving in your mind sounds cheaper, but flying from New York to LA is so much cheaper by comparison. So this is where you have to set the understanding up front and be fairly clear about what you mean. Because if I don't know, and I just, to Max's earlier point about the red squares, this is important, cool, it's in the DR thing and I'm replicating it. I'm not building any extra servers. I'm not putting in load balancers. I'm not putting in any extra database servers. I can't justify all that licensing cost. So I'm just going to deploy your servers as cheaply as I can, and I'll just put them in the replication and it'll be fine. But if it takes me 18 hours to restore those things from backups, you're going to be real mad when it's taking me that long to restore, because none of the requirements were ever set. Nothing was ever said. It was just, this is important. And so I always ask, what is the destination? What are you trying to recover from? If it's, I live in the Southeast and hurricanes are a big deal, yes, absolutely. A full data center failover structure is a useful thing to do. I live in Pennsylvania. We don't have hurricanes that often. We don't have we get the remnants of hurricanes. We get a lot of rain from hurricanes. I might get a tornado or 2, but I don't have this giant storm with 100+ mile an hour winds that's going to tear apart everything. So how are you actually trying to recover? And DR events to IT are large scale things, not individual. And this includes ransomware. Ransomware is a disaster by every definition. But that is a large scale thing. That doesn't affect 1 or 2 things. That affects everything very quickly. So for us on the IT side, application outages are not DR events. I am not executing my DR plan because an app is down. I'm going to go figure out why that app is down. I'm going to fix, is the database server offline? Is the application server somehow not able to talk to the database server? Did a firewall rule go in that's breaking that connection? Is it DNS? Probably DNS. But these are the sorts of things that we see in our world where I'm not thinking about them at the DR level. I'm thinking about just fixing them. So when I look at a application and it says the RTO is less than 4 hours, we have to start having the discussion around resiliency and value, because that's not a DR structure to execute from. That is a resiliency structure. Do I have a secondary site where it's also running and it's load balanced? Do I have multiple database servers that I can fail over between inside of a single site? I'm taking it from big, giant DR plan down to application recovery plan. And that changes the math significantly. And when you pair that with the risk mapping that Max and his team do, you now have the ability to say, hey, yeah, that software licensing for SQL Server, yes, it's expensive, but it's justified because this is the amount of money we would lose if this thing is not up and running.
Yeah, it's such a good point. It's really making it more practical. Like we see this on the BC side too. You have companies with big BC plans that span the entire organization. For them to invoke that plan, the world has to be falling. But when you look at the individual sites, same thing. Like when you break it down to like the actual things that make the product, that deliver the service, that are the apps that run the thing, right? Let's focus on those and build resilience into those actual things, right? And so it becomes really practical, super applicable, because it's far more likely that you're going to have a disruption in part of your facility or part of your business than the entire thing, like what you're saying, than the entire thing. That does happen. But you see in a factory, right? You would see a fire in an area. Now it's unavailable. How are you going to shift that, right? So this is exactly what we're talking about. Make it more practical, directly tied to the business so you can build that true resiliency, not just think you have a plan.
And one of the other things, and I think about this from a manufacturing standpoint, is there's a long tail. When that line that I was referring to earlier, if this goes down, I can't get it back up and running. Everything and every process in that plant that's behind that is now stuck. They are making product that they cannot send forward because there's nowhere to send it forward to. Large organizations can potentially move product around, but now you're incurring a bunch of shipping costs to ship stuff from one plant to another to get it back up and running. So these are the sorts of things where it's beyond just this mill is down and this is the amount of revenue that comes through this mill and the impact to operations downstream the entire way. And also, when we talk about that failover, you can't just fail over. There's a misnomer here, and a lot of this is bound to the way that DR has been designed for the last 25 years. I have stuff in production. I have a DR site. I've configured all my networking in DR. I have the same thing in production. And when I do a test, I'm doing a bubble test. Why are you doing a bubble test? Because you don't want to touch production. So you have a bunch of things that are blocking that environment from talking to your production network because it's running the same IP addresses and the same networks. But if I'm going to fail an application over to that side, I may not have that network available. Or if I do, and this is something that came up in a previous job where we were doing a data center migration, if I move stuff over there, I now have to bring that traffic all the way back. And I don't want to dive too deep into the technical weeds here, but if I have an application running at my DR site, but everything else is still up in production, all of my network traffic for that application has to come back across the wire to production to get out to everything else, which now introduces a bunch of latency, a bunch of hops, and that then reduces throughput. And now I have performance issues that I've never thought about. The other side of that is I now have a bunch of network hops and latency that the application was never designed to handle. It was not meant to be run over the wire like that. So even though it's up, you get to find all of the weird gremlins and design problems that were never accounted for because nobody ever said, hey, what if I ran it across the wire in a weird DR scenario that one person came up with? It's going to be a bad time. But you should fail over more often. And this is something that we find with a lot of our clients at Expedient is we have clients who say, yeah, I literally just do a full failover. We cut the whole thing over from production to DR. We run out of DR for months at a time. And the reason for doing that is they want to know that it works. They want to practice this. I work out from time to time. I suck at cardio. I do not like doing it. I don't like running. I've never been a runner. If I'm going for a run, I'm going to look like this person in this picture real quickly because it's not something I do often. But you don't get better doing something once. You have to do it more often. And it's scary. And that's because it's unknown. We've never done a full DR failover. We've only ever done bubble tests. And that is why you should make the case to do a failover. Now, obviously, there's a whole lot of planning that goes into that. But if you can execute regular failovers consistently, you will know how they work. And it builds your confidence in your ability to do that failover. It may even change the way that you do DR because you know that you can move those networks around. You can move those applications around. You're not going to find the weird little gremlins because you already know. And this is the sort of thing that I have been striving for a while because it's one thing to do a bubble test, but we're finding more things that don't work in a bubble test. How does email work in a bubble test if you're an Office 365 customer? It doesn't. You don't fail over to another Office 365 tenant. You have to work with the Office 365 tenant that you have, and it's just up. We do a lot of things to fudge bubble tests where I replicated a domain controller and a DNS server that I would not bring up in real life because they're already at the secondary site sitting there waiting. So these are all the sorts of things that you can avoid doing. You avoid a lot of the heartburn, and by doing regular failovers, you know that it's going to work. But this isn't just about replication. And I know that we've talked a lot about, I replicate from one side to another. Workload replication and data protection are two very different things. So workload replication is using technologies like Zerto. And if you're in the DR space, you've definitely heard their name before. But I have a copy of my data that is consistently happening and all my writes are being sent over, and I can hit a button and turn the VMs on in my DR site. And due to the cost of licensing various software solutions like Zerto and others, that's really only for the critical workloads. And so you only have this set that goes over there. But you may need to recover a lot more than just that. And this is where data protection has traditionally come in as the secondary tier, and I'll recover from that later. We also have a lot of customers who will replicate backups to us and just recover their backups from there. It's a slower recovery time. you need to make sure that's cool with your BC and DR people. Because if it's not, and you say, oh, well, for us to recover, it's going to take 18 hours. And they say, well, you have 6. What are you talking about? That's not sufficient. You're ticking the box that you have a DR plan, but it is not sufficient to the people who care about that. And when you leverage a DR as a service provider like us, you're able to have a separation of your environments. Our management planes are not connected to your management planes internally. So malware can't hop across the wire and go find us and infect us. So we have that level of separation so you can get clean room compute, but you can also use it for test dev and other compute resources. But the goal of all of this is to ensure business continuity as much as we possibly can, because we can make it a business priority. We can set the ROI. We can design now with resiliency in mind. And when we make failovers regular, they're not a worst case option anymore. They are not emergency use only. You now have the confidence of when you need to fail over, you can do that. And when IT and BC work together, they keep everything running smoothly, and it's better together. And Max, I think that's really where we can wrap and take it to Q&A, but any final thoughts before we do that?
Look, I think MEO exists because we recognize that the quantification lives at the core of these things. It's what ties everybody together to speak the common language. It's not an easy project, but if you use a spreadsheet today to do this stuff, kudos to you. It's really hard. It's only going to get harder. So putting a framework in place that is software-based is going to pay a lot of dividends. It's going to enable faster decisions, more accurate decisions, and that's really what this is all about. So, no, thanks for having me on, AJ. This has been a super interesting conversation. I actually learned a lot.
Yes, and I learned a lot from the risk management side as well. I hope you all learned some as well, and we will take it now to Q&A. Hello, everyone. It is now live Q&A time. I'm very, very excited to bring our friend Max right back. Hi, Max. How are you doing?
Hey, good. How you doing?
There
Good
we
to see you
go.
again.
Mike is unmuted. We did it. We got a lot of really great questions in the pre-registration, and we actually got some live questions after you went through all of the risk management things. And I think there's a lot of folks who are listening to this now who haven't really gotten to that point yet. So I think we could take the first question, and that should pop up here at the bottom. Can there be automated DR setup? Sort of. The issue with automating DR setups is it usually requires somebody to say that, yes, we can do our failovers. There needs to be a declared disaster. With automation, it may not have that declaration, or you need to have something that when the declaration happens, that's what kicks off the automation. Using tools like Zerto, you can execute production or protection groups in a row. You can operate those as multiple different run books to walk through step by step and not go on to step 2 until step 1 is complete. But from an automation standpoint, just kicking off the process is going to be manual because it's going to come down to when the business says to actually do that failover. So we can definitely dive deeper on that as to what you're looking for there, and you can there will be a QR code at the end of scan to talk more about your needs. Let's go to the next question. What are virtual disaster recovery solutions? So this is, like we mentioned, technologies like Zerto and leveraging DR as a service from people like us at Expedient. You have a virtual environment that is just built the same way that you are built on premises, and you are replicating those workloads over, and they are sitting there as little like shell VMs that are just waiting to be powered on. And when they are turned on, either by the software or manually, those VMs are then brought up. They are now online, and they are doing the same things that they were doing in production. In terms of a virtual disaster recovery, that is really where that is focused. We run into a lot of folks who have physical workloads that they need to recover. That's where our co-location comes in to connect those two things together. So we can do that with VMware, we can do it with Nutanix, and then physical workloads would go into our co-location. We can go to the next question. Can it pull backups from multiple servers? Yes.
We have our disaster recovery solutions also have the ability to use our data protection platforms. We have plenty of customers who are using Cohesity. They're replicating from on-prem to us, and then they are restoring their replicated backups into compute in our environment. So it is pulling the backups from multiple servers. It is doing the replication from multiple servers. This might be multiple sites as well. So we have a number of customers who have 4 or 5 different sites that they're all replicating back to us to be their centralized disaster recovery platform. So yes, it can absolutely go to multiple servers. And we can go to the next question. How do desktops play into disaster recovery? This is a long time struggle of disaster recovery services, how to offer end user capabilities. One of the things that COVID kind of did was it made work from home that much more prevalent. It made being able to have the ability to work remotely be a very, very common thing. We're on webinars now. Max and I have seen each other in person one time. So being able to do this sort of desktop solution in disaster recovery, you can do that with virtual desktop environments. I've done that before, where you have everybody's logging into virtual desktops, and then those desktops are also running in a second site, and you load balance between the two. That can be very, very expensive. But when you have a failover, or you have a failure in one of the environments, everything is still running in the other site. It still works, which is kind of nice. Azure Virtual Desktop can be used this way. There's a number of different platforms that can do that. But for the most part, a lot of folks are still physical laptops, physical endpoints, and they're just leveraging those remotely. And that's usually what we see there. And I think we can go to our last question, which is a big one for our friend Max. To the point where we had to go to a subhead to get the rest of the question in.
It's okay. I read the question in the chat too. So yeah, how do we keep this manageable? Super important question we get very often, because that was a lot that we explained. So we've built a software solution to support this whole thing. And the story we told earlier about the laser engraver, that client actually had the same question. And what they said, hey, let's just start with one site and analyze that, put that in the software. And then when we're ready to go to the next one, the software lets us do that. We're just eating that elephant one bite at a time. Like we're just adding to the data set. And then of course, with the financials, because we're working with finance to work on the overall product tree and the product hierarchy, they're very much in charge of updating that on the platform. So the idea here with a framework like this is it has to be able to support these incremental additions of data and allow the people that are contributing to your process to simply log in and update their information, and the system ties it all together. So even though it seems like a huge lift, it very much is. For most of our clients, it's quarterbacked by 1 or 2 people, and they're sporadically once a year reaching out to different groups. So that's how we keep that stuff up to date. And of course, if you're going to be at DRJ, come talk to us about that, or just feel free to reach out to either one of us on LinkedIn and we can chat further.
And I think this is the ensuring engagement is the interesting one. And I think this is something we see, at least on the in our space on the IT and the cloud side, is showing wins, showing that like if you work with a group and they look through all their apps, they figure out their risks, and all of a sudden they get a bunch of money to upgrade their apps, to modernize things, to change the way that they do things, to change their the Toshiba laptop. People go, wait a minute, how are they getting money for a project? I asked for money for a project and I got denied. And it's, well, they quantified all these things. All of a sudden, people are going to be engaged because they also would like the funding to get their projects off the ground, to get their things done. And this is something we've seen time and time again in organizations where, oh, you solved a problem for them, I want you to solve my problem too. And it just grows out from there. And I think
oh, sorry. I'm saying we have literally a client right now. We had a meeting earlier this week about it. They're very early in the journey of even just trying to figure out what DR tier should their apps be and their hosting entities, and what applications are even important. And, we started with an inventory of like 300 plus, and just figuring out and saying, hey, you don't need to look at every single thing. So by quantifying it first, you want to get to that 20%, that top 20% first, and say, let's start with that. Let's knock that over. and then we'll focus on the rest, right? Because so it's not this all or nothing approach. You're going to get stuck. It's do it incrementally and have something that supports that. Excel isn't going to do it, because every time you send that to somebody, they're going to break it. We've all done that. And so some people also just don't know how to use Excel that well. So that's a whole nother thing you got to battle.
IT skills are lost. We've lost our office skills. I don't know if we have any more questions. I think those were all of the questions. For those of you who want to learn more, dive deeper, we're going to put a QR code right about here. You can scan to talk more with us, set up meetings with us. You can reach Max on LinkedIn. You can go to meocontinuity.com to learn more about MEO's services and how they're helping to map risk and IT together. You can also reach out to us at expedient.com and hit the Let's Talk link at the top of the page to learn more and dive deeper. And with that, I want to thank Max for all of your time, and we will see you all later on in September to hear the real story from a customer of ours about how they improved their disaster recovery. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, AJ. Thanks, everybody.